Welcome back. Israeli forces have raided Al-Shifa hospital where thousands of Palestinians are sheltering following days of heavy attacks in the area surrounding the complex in Gaza City. Dozens of Israeli soldiers entered the facility while tanks were stationed in the yard of the medical complex. Israel's military says that it is carrying out an operation against Hamas in an unspecified area at Al-Shifa, calling the assault a targeted operation. Also, it says the raid on Gaza's largest medical facility is based on Israeli and United States intelligence.
Based on intelligence information and an operational necessity, IDF forces are carrying out a precise and targeted operation against Hamas in a specified area in the Shifa hospital. The IDF is conducting a ground operation in Gaza to defeat Hamas and rescue our hostages. Israel is at war with Hamas, not with the civilians in Gaza. The IDF forces include medical teams and Arabic speakers who have undergone specified training to prepare for this complex and sensitive environment, with the intent that no harm is caused to the civilians being used by Hamas as human shields. In recent weeks, the IDF has publicly warned time and again that Hamas's continued military use of Shifa hospital jeopardizes its protected status under the international law. We also gave ample time to stop this unlawful abuse of the hospital. The IDF has also facilitated wide-scale evacuation of the hospital and maintained regular dialogue with hospital authorities.
Meanwhile, Israel is accusing Hamas of using the Al-Shifa hospital as a base, but Hamas rejects this claim, saying the arrival of Israeli forces in Gaza City is not an achievement. Speaking from Doha, Hamas media officer Ezzat al-Rachek said that Shifa is a medical and civilian building and not a military site. The statement came after the Israeli military said it was carrying out a raid in the hospital, having asked Hamas to surrender, with thousands of Palestinian civilians still sheltering inside Gaza Strip's biggest hospital. According to the Director General of the Gaza Health Ministry, the Israeli forces had raided the western side of the medical complex, with reports of big explosions and dusts entering the areas where medics are. Amidst the bombings and dust at the hospital, medics have been concerned with attempting to evacuate patients from a ward that was set to be hit by a shell. Video released by Gaza's Ministry of Health shows medics moving patients on stretchers in what was said to be smoke and dust-filled corridors resulting from the shelling of Al-Shifa hospital in Gaza City. But witnesses say Israeli troops entered Shifa hospital on Wednesday. They were searching its rooms and basements, culminating in a siege that caused global alarm. And that's after what Israel said was a deadly clash at the gates. Meanwhile, police in Israel say they are in the initial stage of an investigation into the crimes perpetrated by Hamas militants on October the 7th and the 8th, and they are also gathering evidence for any future persecution of members of Hamas. Journalists were invited for a screening on visuals gathered from electronic cameras and phones used by Hamas gunmen during the attack on communities, army bases, and an outdoor music festival. The police chief inspector general Yaakov Shabtai says the militants had received clear instructions to kill and abduct people, and head of the cybercrime unit, Superintendent David Katz, added that efforts were being exerted to collect all the evidence from various sources to lay the ground for future persecution of Hamas members.
Those terrorists know exactly what they are going to do. They know exactly that they are going to come into Israel to murder people, to kidnap people, to burn alive people, and to kill everybody that they see on their way. So they are murder who done a terrible thing that a human being can think about it. And we shall do whatever we can to get them and to make them pay for what they done.
We are dedicating ourselves for the last month to collect evidence for all the atrocities and all the actions committed by Hamas in Israel on the 7th and 8th of October. As I mentioned before, we are gathering evidence, first of all, against Hamas members who have been arrested here in Israel during their actions. Second of all, we are proving what happened in every establishment, in every kibbutz, in every army base, in order to provide the evidential ground, the evidential base for the future prosecution of the arrested Hamas members here in Israel. We don't focus on rumors, we don't focus on assumptions. We have to bring evidence. Bringing evidence when this is not a crime scene, it's a battle scene, it's much more complicated because there is the matter of time that passed since the actual actions until we could reach the bodies. Some of them were lying there for days. Second of all, the trauma for the victims, and it doesn't matter in that term if it's just violence, trying to murder them, or trying to sexually abuse them. The trauma is huge, and for the victims, for now, we are only 1 month after the actions. It's still, for many of them, is very hard to express what they saw, what they experienced. It will take some time. We have other solid information about the crimes, including sexual assaults, either from eyewitnesses or either from forensics, which we are still examining, either from statements from other participants.
The World Health Organization has praised Gaza's Al-Shifa hospital for doing all it can to care for patients despite being surrounded by Israeli forces. The hospital has ceased functioning normally since Israel began its offensive in Gaza following the deadly Hamas attack on southern Israel on October the 7th, and it has insufficient electricity, water, and basic equipment. Israel says the hospital sits on top of an underground headquarters for Hamas fighters, but the militants group has denied this. WHO spokeswoman Margaret Harris said Al-Shifa now has 700 patients, more than 400 health staff, and around 3,000 internally displaced people. She says 20 inpatient deaths had been reported in the last 48 hours, although the situation could get much worse.
The inpatient deaths reported in the last 48 hours. Now, the numbers I have are very fluid, so, the situation may indeed be much worse. We know also that there's not enough food, that the staff are struggling to get any clean water because their water tanks were destroyed, but they are still doing everything they can to keep providing medical care for the desperately ill patients they have. So we actually still describe Al-Shifa as a functioning hospital because of the heroic efforts the staff are making. Everyone in that hospital is in a really, really dire situation. All their lives are so threatened. So we as the world have to find a way to help them. The best way would be to stop the hostilities right now, focus on saving lives, not taking lives. It is currently the largest number of attacks in such a short period. And I hope, I don't want to talk about records, but I hope this is the worst we ever see, because what we are also seeing is an increasing trend of many attacks on healthcare. We've seen this in Sudan, we've seen this in Ukraine. It seems to be that somehow the understanding that a hospital must be a safe haven, a place where people come to be cured, to be treated when they are in trouble, when they are in need, has been forgotten. And there seems to be a trend to want to turn them into places of death, despair, and danger, which should never happen.
And as for the UN Emergency Relief Chief Martin Griffiths, hospitals in Gaza should be off limits to the Israeli airstrikes. He says concern is still growing about welfare of patients as hospitals run low on fuel to power generators.
The Secretary General is deeply disturbed by the horrible situation and the dramatic loss of life in several hospitals in Gaza. In the name of humanity, the Secretary General calls for an immediate ceasefire. And just to give you a bit more granular information that we've been receiving from the Office of the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs regarding Gaza, they tell us that all but one of the hospitals in Gaza City and northern Gaza are reportedly out of service as of yesterday, and that is due to lack of power, medical items, oxygen, food, and water, compounded by bombardments and fighting in the vicinities of those health centers. Al-Ali Hospital in Gaza City, which currently accommodates over 500 patients, is the sole medical facility able to receive patients amid increasing shortages and challenges. Hospitals and medical personnel are specifically protected under international humanitarian law, and all parties to the conflict must ensure their protection, and they must not be the object of combat. Any military operation around and within hospitals must take steps to spare and protect the patients, medical staff, and other civilians. A total of 115 trucks carrying food, medicines, health supplies, bottled water, blankets, tents, and hygiene products crossed from Egypt into Gaza yesterday. This brings the number of trucks that have entered Gaza since the 21st to 1,096. The UN Relief Works Agency warned yesterday that its humanitarian operations, including the distribution of aid entering through Rafah crossing, are expected to halt within the next 48 hours following the total depletion of its fuel reserves. In this context, two primary water distribution contractors working for the agency in the south ceased operations yesterday, leaving 200,000 people without access to potable water.
Well, the United States is also concerned about patients in hospitals, and they would like to see safe evacuation of patients to get out of harm's way. The State Department spokesman, Matthew Miller, says the U.S. will support an independent third party to conduct such evacuations. He also said Washington did not see any civilian caught in the crossfire.
We want hospitals to be protected. We don't want to see any civilians, and certainly not babies in incubators or other vulnerable populations caught in a crossfire. We want Hamas to stop using hospitals as a command post. That would be the easiest way to solve this problem, if they would stop using the civilians that are in hospitals as humanitarian shields. But then I would also say that we want there to be safe evacuation for patients at hospitals so they can get out of harm's way. We would support an independent third party or respected third party to conduct those evacuations. We know the government of Israel would support such a step as well. They have said that they would support such a step. The question is, will Hamas allow patients to be evacuated from hospitals, or will they continue to use them as human shields? We think an appropriate step would be to support those evacuations so babies and other vulnerable populations are not in harm's way. The Secretary has made very clear that we condemn extremist violence and harassment against Palestinians. He had a very direct conversation with the Prime Minister about it. What he said to the Prime Minister and other members of the Israeli War Cabinet is that the extremist violence against settlers is unacceptable, that we think the government needs to do more to rein it in, and they need to do more to hold people accountable, and we will be watching to see what steps they take. There are now over 600 American citizens and lawful permanent residents and their family members who have departed Gaza through Rafah Gate. There are a little under 1,000 that we know of that are left now, whose departure we hope to facilitate over the coming days, should they wish to depart. And of course, you will continue to work to try and prevent the conflict from spreading, which has been one of our top objectives from the outset.
And staying with the United States, President Joe Biden says he is engaged in daily discussions to secure release of hostages held by Hamas, something he believes it is going to happen. The president was addressing a press conference and was asked by reporters what his message to family members of the hostages will be. The president says he speaks every day with the parties involved in negotiations over the possible hostage release, but did not share the details.
people involved every single day. I believe it's going to happen, but I don't want to get into detail.
What's your message for the families?
Hang in there, we're coming.
Will you sign the CR?
Mr. President, is
What do you like about it?
reporting that Israel and Hamas are close to a deal for the release of 70 of the hostages? Is there anything you can add to that?
No, thank you.
In the meantime, Israeli airstrikes are not the only thing worrying Gazans. As the war progresses, the weather is causing even some concern. Heavy rains are falling, bringing with it cold weather. Those taking refuge in Khan Yunis say that they did not have anything to protect themselves with from the rain, painting a contrast from before the war when children lit fires in heaters and look forward to that again. Some respondents say in present conditions, children were falling sick ever so often, and even senior citizens have more aches and pains.
I would go to Gaza and there would be just a few drops of rain. The streets would just flood because the systems are not good enough to absorb and do all the absorption and all the sewage and water management and all of this. So the streets would really flood. This is in a normal day.
We're very concerned. We've already got outbreaks of diarrheal diseases. We've already got recorded well over 30,000 cases when we would normally expect 2,000 cases in the same period. And this will just add further to the suffering. We've got so much infrastructural damage. We've got a lack of clean water.
And the families of Israelis have been held hostage by Hamas in the Gaza Strip have kicked off a 5-day march from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem to demand the government does more to secure the hostages' release. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is coming under fierce criticism for some relatives for not doing more to secure their release as Israeli military pushes very deep into Gaza with an order to destroy Hamas. People from all walks of life are participating in these protests, from young children to the elderly.
We're marching to the Prime Minister to shout to him that we need them home now. We need them home now. We need him to do everything he can to bring our loved ones back home.
We have to do everything. Our government has to do everything to release them. Otherwise, we will be a mentally wounded country. It will not be no victory and no standstill, nothing, if we don't release them. They were kidnapped. They didn't do anything wrong. It was the government who had to protect them. The society who had to protect them. They were there, soldiers on the border. We failed, and we have to do everything to bring them home.
Let's turn our attention now to the story of Yahav Winner, who was 22 years old when he witnessed the death of his best friend's father, Jimmy Doshim, by a rocket from nearby Gaza. Over a decade later, as an established filmmaker, Winner made a short film called The Boy to finally come to terms with his experience. It wasn't his first film on the subject of rocket attacks on his own native kibbutz Kfar, where he grew up, which lies just a few kilometers from the border of the restive Gaza Strip. On October the 7th, hordes of Hamas militants overran Kfar Aza when they attempted to break into Winner's family home. He, his wife, Sheli Atari, and their infant daughter, Shaya, hid in the safe room. As gunmen tried pounding open the safe room's window, Winner held it very tightly shut, asking Atari to run to safety with Shaya. Later, Atari learned that Winner died right by the window he had held shut for so long, killed by militants who had bombarded the house with grenades and bullets. 5 weeks since his death, The Boy is now being screened to audiences in Tel Aviv as a tribute to the late Winner.
So Yavis was taken it from his personal story, and there is no boy at the film. It's a boy called because everybody treats him like a boy, because if somebody is not okay mentally and he has PTSD, you know, it's hard for him to grow up as a normal young guy. So the film is like a closure to his experience. He went, and it's very weird. He came back to the place where he saw Jamie Kedoshim died in front of him, murdered from the rocket, and then he was murdered. I think now it's very, I always think that it's a weird circle, you know. In 1 second, they opened the safe room window, and then he didn't hold the door, he held the window. We had a little glance, not even like a long goodbye, and he pushed the window against him, and I ran away with the baby. No shoes, no nothing on me, with pajamas. Actually, he was the only opinion that mattered to me. Even if everybody says it sucks, if he says it's good, maybe there is something in it. And this was it's very hard for me to understand that the only person that matters to me in a matter of art and a friend is, I will need to imagine him inside my head, but he's gone.